I wanted to make a video of the SawTrax carriages and how these inserts work, because I think it's kind of obvious that some people really don't have a good understanding of how these carriages work. So basically, this uses a Makita saw. It has a viewing port on the side so you can see where your cut mark is. If it's plugged in, it has a built-in light so you can see the mark. It has a dust brush underneath. Let me show you how this works. So I'm going to lock the carriage so it doesn't spring up. Take the dust hose out of the way. And these pins up here, they pull up and they turn a quarter turn. And as they turn a quarter turn, the carriage insert just comes out. Now this Makita has a dust brush underneath to capture the sawdust, and it has a blade guard. It uses 7 1/4 inch blades that you can go and get anywhere. For instance, today I went to Home Depot and I counted 23 different kinds of 7 1/4 inch blades there. My competitor uses 8 inch blades, and I counted 0 8 inch blades there. The saw was also there. It's the Makita 5007F. The cost at Home Depot for this saw was $99. So it's easy to replace. We built a special dust hood for it, and we use a 2.5 inch dust hose. Let me go ahead and put this up. So we use a 2.5 inch dust hose, and with this dust hose, we also supply a hose coupler, so all you do is plug your shop vac into it. So it's pretty easy to use. Now with that said, to put the knife cutter on, now if you notice the knife cutter, the knife blade is retracted. Okay, and it's a regular alpha segmented knife where it goes out. If you want to sharpen it, you just put it out a little bit, take a pair of pliers, which I happen to have up here, and you sharpen it by snapping it. Set my pliers, snap the blade. I just sharpened it. Now when you take it off the machine, you always want to make sure the blade is retracted. When you put it on the machine, what you want to do is you want to lower it. Using this knob on top, you want to lower the blade to it's about a quarter to 1/8 of an inch above the substrate. I take it down to about 1/8. Right above your substrate. Once it's above the substrate, you want to lower the blade out till it's about a quarter to 1/8 of an inch below the substrate. Now the knife cuts right along the inside of this lip. And the reason we have the knife cut there, which is a different spot than the saw, is because by cutting it here, you don't need a backer board where you're constantly putting it on, taking it off. If you forget to leave the backer board, if you forget and you leave the backer board on when you go to rip cut with other machines, you bend up the blade. They're expensive blades, they're hard to find. Or if you spin the blade and you pull it down into the backer board, the way their backer board works, it's for me, much more trouble than what it's worth. Let me go ahead and put this on and show you how easy this is to put on. You put it in, and you just turn these quarter turn fasteners, and it locks it in place. Now, if I were going to use this, I would lower the knife till it's about 1/8 of an inch above my substrate. I would extend the blade about 1/8 of an inch to a quarter inch below the substrate. So once again, it's cutting inside this line. And then once I have it in there, I would just tighten this white screw on the end. And what this white screw does, since it's an alpha knife, it keeps the blade from any kind of wobble while it's in there. And it really works great. Now you can cut your PVC with it. It automatically pops up. It's spring-loaded, so if you're cutting like 10 mil and it doesn't get through the first pass, or 6 mil PVC and you have to make several passes, it will spring up. It also has a blade tensioner here. It's spring-loaded, and it has several notches. So it has 3 notches where you can actually change the tension of the knife springing down. So depending on what you're cutting, you can kind of customize it a little bit. When you take the knife off there, you simply retract the blade so you don't cut anything. You pull up on these 2 fasteners up here. They're spring-loaded. You turn them a quarter turn, and you rotate the knife out. Safe, and it's not going to cut anybody. Other knife blades, they stick out all the time. you can try and retract the knife, but the blade's still sticking out. Since it's an alpha knife, the replacement blades, you can get them anywhere. That is a sign supply shop. We also have a rolling shear. What I really like about this rolling shear is that it uses standard cutting blades on the shear, and it has a much longer cutting channel than other rolling shears on the market, say in your substrate cutters. And the reason, they have very small slots in here that they're only this big. And the problem with those is when you have a small slot, the separation has got to be much more drastic. And that separation, as you're going through your material, causes what we call noodling. And what that does, it bends your drop piece so it's unusable. And so you waste a lot of ACM or 3 mil ACM because of that. And ACM is expensive. So we think that's kind of a really poor design, and kind of a ridiculous design. So we like our ACM cutter, and we like that it's much longer slot, so your separation in your material here is over 9 inches versus 3 inches. So you're not going to get that same kind of noodling with our ACM cutter. Put the saw in. You simply hold it up here, and you put the lip inside. You rotate it close. You hold it against the backing, and you drop your pins in. Sometimes you have to wiggle a little bit, but the pins usually just seat by themselves. To take it out, it's the opposite. Pull up, quarter turn, pull up, quarter turn, pops right out. Changing saw blades. Standard Makita saw has a blade lock using 7 1/4 inch saw blades. So, like I said, you can get them pretty much anywhere, a hardware store. They use this saw. You can cut hardy plank with it. You can cut ferrous material, which is iron and steel. You can use a non-ferrous blade to cut aluminum. And you can also rip cut. To rip cut, get your saw in here. And as you notice, there's 2 black knobs here. So you pull up on these 2 black knobs, and you spin the insert. And there's holes in the plate behind it, and it will seat automatically at 90 degrees. Okay? Real easy putting the dust hose on here. What I like about our dust brush on here, compared to other panel saws use a nylon, a clear plastic hose that you have to drop down onto your substrate. Okay? And it works good for about a week. And the reason I say that is, in a shop, you're cutting different thicknesses of material. You're cutting 3 mil ACM, you're cutting 6 mil Centra, you're cutting maybe 3/4 inch board. So maybe you're cutting 1/2 inch whiteboard. So you're constantly changing what you're cutting. And to use their system properly, you're supposed to drop this vinyl hose down to the top of your substrate. And when you do that, it works pretty well. Okay, I'll be honest with you, or my competitor, when you do it properly, it works pretty well. The problem is, suppose you're cutting 3 mil Centra, okay? The next day, you're cut 1/2 inch whiteboard, 3/4 inch plywood, whatever. Now, somebody else was using the machine the day before, you just came and forgot, you throw your material underneath, and you pull the saw down to cut. When you do that and you don't raise that tube, it gets pushed into the saw blade and it gets shredded. So that's why it only lasts about a week, because that's about how long it takes for you to forget to pick that tube up and readjust it. So when you readjust it down, people always forget to readjust it up, goes in the saw blade, it's worthless. So that's how the saw works. What I like about our knife, and some people don't like our knife for this reason, our knife and our saw cut in 2 different spots. And I looked at it as an end user. To get their knife to work on, say, coroplast or 3 mil or whatever you want to do. First of all, the panel saw company that makes the knife cutter, their knife doesn't pivot, so you're not going to cut Centra with it. So you want a pivoting knife for that. It cuts coroplast fine. if that's the only thing you're ever going to cut, well, it'll work. It doesn't rip cut like ours. Well, our knife will go in sideways and you can rip cut stuff. But the reason we designed this is in order to get their knife, say you want to cut a 2-inch or 3-inch strip off of something. Well, you have this opening here, and when the knife is cutting, it's pushing backwards. So to make up for that, you've got to put a backer board on here. So it pushes back against that board on their machine, and you have support for it, and then you can cut it. And that's fine until you have to put that backer board on and then take it off for the saw. Now, the way theirs works, let me explain a little bit. When you put on their backer board, it's got 2 holes in it for 2 screws, and there's holes in the pan here. When you put on the backer board, you have to line up this screw with the hole, and you have to hold it there, and they use a wing nut. And you have to reach around back with this wing nut and hold it on there with your Phillips head screwdriver, because it's a pan head screw, and try and screw it on, which is pretty good. You're doing pretty good if you can put that nut on without seeing the screw, but you got to hold it, all right? And then you have to do this whole thing again with the lower screw, and 1 out of every 2 times you're going to drop that nut because you're doing it backwards and you can't see it, and when now you drop it, now it's behind the machine and it's in the sawdust and it's a mess, and you got to pull it up and blow it out. So after a while you just say, heck with it, I'm not going to use that backer board, and so you really don't use the knife at all. So it's basically just a plain panel saw. So with ours, I'll put the knife in. I go ahead and drop this in here. All right, so I'll put the knife in. What I'll do, let me go ahead and lock it. What I would do, I'd lower the knife, I would adjust it down, I'd put the blade out, and I reach in from the side to kind of screw in the blade, and I'm done. And the blade will cut it right along this thing. So that's all there is to it. So we have a left and a right tape. You can set one up for the saw, one up for the knife if you want, or however you want to set it. We also have vertical tapes for the machine. Now, granted, there's 2 different tapes, or there's 2 different cut marks, but you're going to use the knife. You don't have to get this backer board on and take it off. Now, I've heard them say at a show, you can leave that backer board on when you use the saw, and that is true to a point. Now, let me explain why it's true to a point. If you're cross-cutting, your saw will cut in that backer board. Okay, there's a slot in it. The problem is when you go to rip cut, and you spin that saw while that blade is in that curve cut into that backer board. And when you spin that saw, because the backer board's on there, and the guy said, hey, I can cut with that backer board on there, but you can cross cut, but you can't rip cut. And you spin that saw, you'll bend the tooth of that expensive blade, and their blades are almost twice as much as our blades, and 3 times as much as what you're going to find on the street. You're buying a new blade. You can't sharpen that blade because the tooth is bent. You're buying a new blade. Or if you're smart and you bring it all the way up, and now you spin it, and you pull it down, you just hit the tooth into the top side of the backer board, and once again, you're buying a new expensive blade. So we felt, our philosophy was, we want to make it easier for the user. So we just made it simple altogether. So you don't need a backer board, you're not taking it on, you're not breaking up your saw blades. Okay, so it's much easier to use from an end user standpoint. Now I'll show you one more thing that I like to use with the ACM cutter. So let me go ahead and take off the knife. I'm going to retract the blade, pull it off the machine. You'll see how fast this is. So I'm going to reach to the side, loosen up the nut, retract the blade, quarter turn, quarter turn. Oh, this isn't out. Quarter turn, and it comes off. I'm going to put the ACM cutter in. Now I'm going to put the ACM cutter, drops right in, quarter turn, drops down, quarter turn, drops down, and these things move up. Now, to put on the sheet clamp, now I like to use a sheet clamp when I'm using the ACM cutter. And the reason is it kind of stabilizes your ACM. So I'm going to show you how this goes on. The key to remember, it has a lip on the bottom here. And this bottom lip has got to go on the bottom lip of the saw. And the hinge goes in between your dog ears down there. And this goes on. It has a magnet here to hold it up. So when you open it up, it holds it up. When you pull it down, it just closes. So it wants to close. Open it, hold it up, close, it comes down. Now, generally you don't use this when you're using the saw. Okay, and the reason you don't use this, you're using the saw, is you're using the saw because you're cutting rigid material. All right, so you don't need this because you're cutting rigid material. A sign maker's package comes with a spring hold down with these fingers that hit in here, and that holds even your 3 mil Sentra against here. If you're cutting a lot of 3 mil Sentra, what I like about using the saw is you can gang cut. You can cut 5 pieces of 3 mil Sentra at a time, no problem. All right. The other thing about these saws, it's a welded steel frame, and you can climb on this thing, use it as a ladder. It uses ladder hinges. As a matter of fact, it has wheels on the frame that aren't on the floor because it's on the stand. If I were to pull this whole thing up, I'd be able to move it pretty easily because then it goes on the wheel. But as it's tilted backwards, it goes off the wheel and onto the stand. The stand uses 10 lock nuts. It uses ladder hinges. It's very easy to fold the stand. When you buy a package that includes the stand's attached. So it's really, you take it out of the crate, you roll it to where you're going to use it, unfold the stand. You will end up putting this retraction mechanism on, and you tension the spring in the spool, and it has a little wrench in there where you can tension it. And what we do is we let you put the tapes on the machine. And you can put one on the left side, one on the right side, 2 on the right side, however you want to set it up. And we also have a vertical tape for when you're rip cutting. So all in all, these sheet machines, we've worked hard to design them so it's easy to use. Okay? We didn't design it so that it's easy for us to make. There's 2 more important parts that really set our machines apart before I let you go. One is the bearings. We use real bearings. We don't use a U-bolt with little black rings around it that the more you take the play out of the carriage, the harder it is to move. That's kind of stupid. That's antiquated. We use real bearings. It's a sealed steel bearing. There's 3 per corner, 12 per carriage. And the other thing we do is we have a patented alignment system that's called the AccuSquare, and it's down here on the bottom of the saw. And we set it at the factory, and it keeps the frame from ever going out of square. Let me explain why. Other panel saws and other cutters are known for going out of square because usually there's several adjustments to get it square. Okay? You have a tracking mechanism and you have the rolling fence. Now, our competitor they like welding. They weld the fence to the frame. They weld their guide tubes to the brackets. All right? We don't like that. We have more of a component design. We took that component system from the building of the F-18. I have a Navy pilot background. And because we have a component design, it allows you to change your components out. For instance, if for some reason you were to hit this fence with a forklift and bend it, with our competitor's saw, that's welded to the frame. You're buying a new saw. And if you spend $4,000 for that saw, you're spending another $4,000 to replace it. If you ding the guide tube because some knucklehead ran into it or did something to it, and now the guide tube's slightly bent. With ours, you take out this nut, the bottom nut on the bottom bracket, pull up, pull down, the guide tube comes out. Okay? You just replace the guide tube. So it keeps you from spending a lot of money on this machine, because this machine, they're not cheap, but they're designed to last basically forever. There's very little to go out of square. We have one adjustment. And with that AccuSquare adjustment, we use a set screw like an indexing pin, and it never shifts. Our rollers don't adjust individually like our competitor. Their hubs are on a cam. And so not only do you have to worry about according to their instructions, you're supposed to whack the guide tubes on the top, left and right, until you kind of get that in square. You also have to align all the rollers. To align their rollers with a full-size machine, you need a 10-inch straight edge. Now, we had to make a 10-foot, I mean, you need a 10-foot straight edge. We have to make a 10-foot straight edge, okay? You can't buy a 10-foot straight edge. So I don't know how you're supposed to use a 10-foot straight edge to align your rollers, because we had to get it fabricated. So their outside rollers are not on cams. All their interior rollers are on cams, and for me, that's a ridiculous design. Why do they have that ridiculous design? Because they weld their fencing onto the frame. Ours bolt on, so they can bolt off. On our right fence, on the far side of our right fence, there's the same kind of AccuSquare system. It's basically a vernier. We have, I go too much in depth for it, but it's kind of like an old slide rule. And the holes that line up, we use a screw or to lock it in place so it doesn't shift. It doesn't go out of whack on you. So you're always square. Okay, so those are some of the fine points of this machine. Unlike some of the substrate cutters, we feed from left to right. When you use an ACM cutter, let me grab one of those ACM cutters, and I'll be right back. We're going to step this back a little bit, and this is ACM, and I put the shiny side up so we're not advertising for one sign supply place versus another. But I'm going to make a quick cut here to show you how this works. So I'm going to loosen up the carriage. I'm going to make sure that the clamp is down. And I'm going to make a cut. Now, when I talk about noodling, and those who have substrate cutters, we just made a cut, and you can see it's straight. Okay? So suppose you needed to make 3-inch pieces, 4-inch pieces that are 12 inches long or 2 feet long, you can do that. You can make the cuts here. Okay? If you're feeding with another, like a substrate cutter, and I don't want to mention names, but when you make that 4-inch strip, that comes off and it noodles really bad. It's unusable. So it's, for me, I don't feel like it's a good system. All right. About if you're cutting, you cut up to about a 1/2 inch here, 3/4 inch off your piece of ACM. And the way you would do it is we have a stop. What's kind of nice about our stop is you can use it on the left side or the right side of the machine, or if you have a mid fence, you can also use it on the mid fence. Okay, and it goes typically goes here. All right, on the side of on the top edge of the lip of the fence. And if you look, there's that lip on both sides. So that works out really well. So if you're using the knife, you can cut your any thickness of your PVC. You may have to make more than one pass, but you can score cut. If you want a gang cut, you'd use the saw. I mean, you're not going to get a better cut. It has a rounded edge because it's a rolling shear, and it does really a super job. So that's our saw. If you want to take this off to use the saw, I pull up from the bottom, and it comes right off. We make this machine in a compact model that's 5 feet wide. The model you see here is a 10-foot wide machine. It does better for supporting your full-size sheets. But we do have compact sizes that are 5 feet wide. We also make extensions for that 5 feet wide. On our full size, this is a 5-foot crosscut machine. You can see where the 4-foot bar is right here. This is the 5-foot bar. We make a 6-foot crosscut, a 7 and an 8-foot crosscut, 100-inch crosscut. So you have a lot of variety to use. They don't take up a ton of space. They're fast. With the dust brush system on our machines, along with the vacuum system, it does a great job. We joke with people that it sucks, and it really does, because the brush traps your sawdust, the blade actually acts like a fan and suspends it, and the vacuum is able to pull it out then. All right, and that way it doesn't shoot all over your shop. One thing that sign guys got to be really careful of is having a lot of dust around, because you're putting on vinyl, or you're doing a flatbed printer. So the other machines are substrate cutters are fine if you're just doing very light stuff in one direction. Why don't I like them is you're limited. You're limited what you can offer your customers. Not only are you limited what you can offer your customers in material, but also material thickness. So one of the reasons I like about the panel saw, suppose your customer comes in and says, hey, I want a 3 foot by 6 foot blank of whatever material to use with my sign. Well, with your light duty wall cutters, the substrate cutters, I don't want to mention names, but you can't cut that because you're only cutting up and down. You're not cutting in both directions. You're just cutting in one direction. If they want to use thicker acrylic, their acrylic is, and I've seen the video, I really couldn't believe it. They had a guy scoring acrylic and then takes off this little piece of acrylic and steps on it. And hopefully it snaps, because it snaps. You don't cut it. You score it like you score glass. So, and you're hoping that it snaps in the right place. With ours, you just use the saw. Cut the acrylic. Cut it where you want. Cut it in either direction. This is a heavy-duty cutter. Okay? It's not a light-duty cutter. You're going to pay probably pretty close as much as you would with some cutters that are just substrate cutters. And the reason is they can get away with it, because some of the salesmen are pushing them, all right? But if you want a cutter that can cut, a heavy-duty cutter that doesn't go out of square, that can cut everything you're going to use in your sign shop today, and anything that can come out in the future, you can do it with this. With the saw, they make metal steel cutting blades for the saw. So you can cut anything. All right, and plus we have the rolling shear that gives you as good of a cut as you're going to get. Actually gives you a better cut, because you saw here, you don't get the noodling. All right, you can't cut off a 2 or 3 inch piece of ACM with those substrate cutters, because of that short cutting head. It bends the heck out of it, and you got to be careful, because when it bends, it has a tendency to hit you in the face. All right, we had an evaluation recently done by somebody who was used to using substrate cutters, okay? And they were concerned about using our knife cutter and pulling it down and possibly hitting the user in the foot. And then he sent me a video of them using the substrate cutter, and as he's pulling it down, he just barely grabs it out of in time so it doesn't poke him in the eye. As he's pulling it down, this thing's noodling it up, and he just knocks it out of his face, and I thought to myself, you almost put your eye out, and you're worried about hitting your foot with the insert for the knife. I thought that was kind of humorous. But anyway, so with our saw, you're going to be able to cut everything on the market today, any kind of substrate today, and any kind of substrate you're going to get in the future. Okay, so you're buying a machine that's going to last you. It's not. I mean, aluminum is great if you're in an airplane. They don't make steel airplanes, but you're using this on the ground. You want something heavy duty, something that's going to last, something you can cut everything with, something that does everything the substrate cutters do. We even make a glass cutter for this thing, okay? It does everything that the substrate cutters can do, but it can cut thicker materials. Suppose you're just not using an 1/8 inch acrylic or a 1/4 inch. You want to use a 1/2 inch acrylic. You can do it with this. You can't do it with that. You're not going to snap a 1/2 inch piece of acrylic or Lexan. So you'll do everything with this machine. So I highly recommend a SawTrax. I'm totally biased. I'm the president of SawTrax. But like I said, we made this machine for the end user because we know what's out there, and we've been doing this 25 years. We know what people want. They want something easy. They want something fast. They want something safe. You know? If you look at our competitor's panel saw, it doesn't have a guard on their saw blade. They take it off the machine. Where are they going to put it? Ours has a guard on it. It makes sense. Their knife blade doesn't retract. So you take their knife off the machine, where do you put them? So anyway, you want something safe. You don't want people in your shop getting hurt or getting sliced, God forbid. You know, I have to take them to the emergency room. There's blood everywhere. You want something safe, something easy to use. Something, if you're a husband and wife shop, something your wife can use. Something easy. Okay, this is easy. All right, so that's it. So if you have any questions, give us a call. Our toll-free number in the States is 888-SawTrax or 888-729-8729. Overseas, 770-974-0021. info@sawtrax.com, and that's SawTrax with an X. For our overseas international markets, if you're in a place that has 220-volt saws, we use the Bosch saw that's 220 volts. So, but it works pretty much the same way as the Makita. The 220-volt saw uses 190-millimeter blades that are indigenous to wherever you live, all right, because they make that saw blade for you. Anyway, so that's it. Like I said, buy a cutter that's easy to use, that you can use forever, and you can cut anything with it. Heck, if you want to make some cabinets, you can cut up your wood on these things. They work great. All right, thank you for your time.